There is a narrow passage in the harsh desert of southern Jordan that twists and turns for about a kilometer before it reveals a site that was hidden away for centuries. Carved directly into the red cliffs that surround it lies a facade of perfectly preserved columns and pediments. But it is not a facade of a building, but of a tomb, cut into the rock cliff by a people that have been often overlooked by history. This is the ancient city of Petra, the capital of the Nabataean Kingdom, now one of the most astonishing archaeological sites on Earth. Let's now explore some of the history of the city and the people that built it by going through its effect and feature that Civilization VI attributes to it. In Civilization VI, Petra provides the player with +2 food, +2 gold, and +1 production on all desert tiles for the city that houses it. As a player who was introduced to this series with Civilization V, I have to say that Petra holds a special place in my heart, and I think Civ VI, like 5, has done a nice job at translating the Wonders history into gameplay. We can begin to explore that history by taking a look at the fascinating Nabataean people. The Nabataeans started off as nomads in the Arabian desert, where they migrated from pasture to pasture to feed their accompanying herds. They eventually settled in an area in what is now modern-day southern Jordan, that allowed them to control the trade of frankincense from Lian to Gaza. Even though the Nabataeans had their own script that developed out of the Aramaic alphabet, they didn't seem to write much about themselves, so much of what we know of them comes from outside sources. The first written mention of the Nabataeans in Petra comes from Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian. Diodorus, describing the Nabataeans as an Arab tribe, gives an overview of their customs, highlighting that they were a freedom-loving people that had mastered the ways of the desert. He also wrote that the Nabataeans were by far the richest of the Arab tribes, as they were traders of frankincense and myrrh. He continues by describing the failed invasion that the Macedonian successor of Alexander the Great, Antigonus Monophthalmus, ordered. From his description of their defense, it is very obvious how well accustomed the Nabataeans were at using the desert as their fortress, while also being able to survive in these harsh conditions even when being threatened. What I found most interesting of all, from Diodorus' account, is the plea for peace that the Nabataeans made to Demetrius, son of Antigonus. King Demetrius, with what desire or under what compulsion do you war against us who live in the desert and in a land that has neither water, nor grain, nor wine, nor any other thing whatever of those that pertain to the necessities of life among you? For we, since we are in no way willing to be slaves, have all taken refuge in a land that lacks all the things that are valued among other peoples, and have chosen to live a life in the desert and one altogether like that of wild beasts, harming you not at all. We therefore beg both you and your father to do us no injury, but, after receiving gifts from us, to withdraw your army and henceforth regard the Nabataeans as your friends. I think this serves as a great indicator that the Nabataeans really made the desert their home, forming a kingdom in a terrain so harsh that most other peoples would disregard without second thought. Because nobody else could move through it efficiently, the Nabataeans became the essential middlemen for trade between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. Frankincense, myrrh, spices, cinnamon, and other luxury goods from the east all passed through Nabataean territory on their way to the markets of the Mediterranean through the ancient port of Gaza. The Nabataeans heavily taxed that traffic, and they were also routinely hired to accompany caravans, building a network of way stations and cisterns across the desert that made long-distance trade viable in that harsh climate. Petra sat at the heart of this network, a city hidden in the mountains of the desert, perfectly positioned to control the flow of goods in every direction. I think this is the perfect explanation for the first part of Petra's effect in Civ VI, the one providing gold to its desert isle. It is very clear by now that a defining part of Nabataean identity was their role as desert traders, and Petra was the main commercial hub of their kingdom, so making it provide gold as a bonus is very appropriate. I think this is a good time to mention that even though Petra was a whole proper settlement, the in-game model that Civilization VI chooses to represent it is the iconic facade of Al-Khazneh, meaning the treasury. Maybe that also played a part when it comes to the gold bonus. However, archaeologists and historians believe that the building was actually a mausoleum. It seems that the name of the structure comes from a 19th century Bedouin legend according to which the large stone urn on the top of the facade contains hidden treasure. Now to explain the food bonus, we can again look at Diodorus' writings, where he mentions that the Nabataeans used the desert as a refuge, hiding reservoirs of rainwater under the sand and making markers for them. They were the only ones that understood these markers and used them to find the hidden water for themselves and their cattle. He also mentions that the Nabataeans were very good herders, as well as excellent desert foragers, harvesting peppers and what they called wild honey from trees native to that terrain. I think it is fair to say that they were more accustomed than probably any other civilization of the time when it comes to surviving from what little the desert gave them, thus justifying the Petra's food bonus. As far as the last and most vague effect regarding the production bonus, I can't really tie it to anything specific about Petra or the Nabataeans. The Nabataeans were skilled craftspeople, producing distinctive pottery that was traded widely across the region, and their stone-cutting expertise is evident from the various structures that were erected in Petra, as well as other parts of their kingdom. But neither of these things translates neatly into a production bonus in my opinion. In any case, it does help at making your desert city overall more efficient in-game, which is just fine by me. The wonder requires the mathematics technology. I think there are two reasonable explanations for this. The first and simpler one is that Petra was, above all else, a trading city. The Nabataeans had a clear expertise when it comes to creating trade routes and managing their economy in an efficient manner. Having a good understanding of mathematics obviously helps when it comes to these activities. However, I think that mathematics as a technology implies a more precise use of the science, which is not really that important for trading. This brings us to the second explanation, which I prefer. Something that I haven't mentioned yet is the sophisticated water management system that the Nabataeans developed. It required careful calculation of slopes, volumes, and flow rates across a complex and varied desert landscape. The system that they created worked so well that when the Romans eventually conquered the Nabataeans, they didn't feel like they had to construct aqueducts and water systems, like they did in pretty much all of their other conquered territories. This could possibly mean that they couldn't find anything to improve on the system that the Nabataeans had developed centuries ago. Archaeologists have documented just how precisely engineered these systems were, with channels cut to exact gradients to ensure water moved at the right speed without eroding the rock. Engineering a system capable of supplying a large desert city with enough water to survive and even thrive with an estimated population of 20,000 people at its peak is no small feat. And it is a feat that shows a deep understanding of various principles of mathematics. The wonder must be built on desert or desert floodplains. In case it wasn't clear yet, Petra was established in the middle of the desert. So yeah, its entire identity, its architecture, its water systems, all of it is inseparable from the desert environment that surrounds it. So having it be built anywhere but the desert just wouldn't make sense. Petra sits in a system of wadis and seasonal watercourses, which also explains why you can build it on top of floodplains as well.
Petra is a brilliant display of man's art history in turning barren rock into majestic wonder.
The in-game quote comes from Edward Dawson, and it's a bit of a weird one. I can only assume that the quote comes from a travel guide published in 2010, named Travel Through Jordan, Land of Temples, Fortresses and Mosaics. This appears to be the only book written by Dawson. The quote is perfectly fine on its own, it's just a bit weird that the developers chose it instead of something more historical or poetical. I will say that I found it kinda funny that while looking for information for the quote, I could only find it as references to the game of Civ VI. Commenting on the quote itself, the description of Petra as a display of human artistry transforming barren rock into something magnificent is very appropriate. I find something very awe-inspiring when looking at how perfectly the facades blend with the natural landscape. Just how the Inca made Machu Picchu in accordance to the mountaintops, so does the city of Petra seem to live in harmony with the desert cliffs that surround it and encompass it. The Nabataean Kingdom managed to withstand attacks from both the Greek Antagonids, as mentioned before, as well as the Hasmonean Kingdom in Judea, then ruled by the Judean king Alexander Jannaeus. However, in 32 BC, Herod the Great, the Jewish Roman ruler of the Herodian Kingdom, invaded Nabatea and defeated them. The kingdom was finally annexed by the Romans in 106 AD, while they were ruled by Trajan. It fell under the administrative region of Arabia Petraea, and life seems to have continued as normal for the Nabataean people. However, as the city of Palmyra developed to be an increasingly important center of trade in the Middle East, attracting much of the Arabian trade routes, the significance of Petra slowly faded. In the 4th century AD, it served as the capital of the Palestina Salutaris province of the Byzantine Empire. During that period, in 363, an earthquake destroyed large parts of the city, as well as damaging the important water system on which the city was dependent on. The once grand capital seems to have slowly vacated, and by the 7th century Arabian conquests, the ancient cities of the Nabataean Kingdom were already abandoned. Other than some castles that were built in the area by crusaders, it seems that the site of the ancient city was mostly left alone, inhabited by Bedouin tribes. This was until, in 1812, Petra was reintroduced to the Western world by Swiss traveller Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who was led there by locals. Personally, I find Petra in Civ VI to be a simple but classic design. It's easy to look at the bonuses it provides and make assumptions about its history, but even in a design as straightforward as that, there were still interesting things to discover and analyze. Mathematics being the unlock requirement for it is a nice highlight of that. Petra has well earned its place in game as the wonder you go for when trying to make a desert city viable, and I believe this ties in very nicely with the actual history we talked about here.